Xeroxing, and so on.
For
I mean,
some, meaning certainly in the Haredi world, there would be those who have take issue with it.
I had an experience at one point a few years ago where I was invited to a meeting with one of the leaders of the educational establishment, welfare establishment of the Satmar community. There was a desire to promote some kind of PR that would show the community in a positive light to the general society. And so one suggestion that was made was to do interviews with children, students in day schools, yeshivas that were run by the community in Williamsburg. And when the suggestion was made that they would send television crews with cameras and so on to one of the yeshivas, the response of one of the leading figures in the community was, no, we don't send such things there. Well, how about to one of the girls' schools? Yes, that's possible. But there was a condition. There had to be 2 Bocharim named from a yeshiva community who would speak on behalf of the attitude, opinions, and experiences of the girls and women involved in the women's education institutions. And that ended the whole idea of a program.
Right. So again, within the Haredi world, there certainly would be, and certainly still is, those who would say it's inappropriate for women to even be an office manager or boss of a company. I think in a totally secular setting, there's probably more leeway even in that world. But it certainly could be the case. And then let's go through of Moshe, because he's going to establish an important principle, and then we can come back to that question. Okay, so the case is there's a widowed woman who wants to take over her husband's role as being the mashkiach, and again, not clear if it's a restaurant or factory, in some kosher establishment. So if Moshe first tells us, I believe that this is bolded in the English, concerning the trustworthiness, mitzad ne'emanut ein shum chashash. As far as this woman being trustworthy to be a mashkiach or mashkicha, there's no concern. She'im achi muchzeket leisha kshera liudat mevina eich umar lashkiach yesh lismoch aleha. Because as long as she is someone who's known and presumed to be kosher and knowledgeable, then we can rely upon her. So as far as the trustworthiness and her knowledge, that's not an issue, right? He says elsewhere that the principle is Eid echad ne'eman b'isurin. One witness is trusted when it comes to laws of Isser v'Heter, that which is permitted and forbidden, and that's true. That's true for man and for woman, right? In the most traditional of households, it's the woman who's responsible for the kitchen, and the whole family eats based on her authority, based on what she says is kosher, right? Even more extreme, a husband trusts his wife when she says she went to the mikvah and immersed properly, right? We don't need, right? We trust women when it comes, right? We trust one woman when it comes to matters of Isser v'Heter. But then he says, Yesh ladun bazeh mitzad acher. There's a second consideration. Hinei harambam b'perek aleph min Malachim katav v'chein kol mesimot shebeYisrael ein memanim bahem ela ish. He quotes the Rambam that we can only, for any appointments among the Jewish people, we can only appoint a man. Af shelo yadu ali be'onyi makom lidvarav. Even though I don't understand where the Rambam gets this from, the b'sifrei shetziyin, right? Because the Sifri that he quotes only says about the context of a king. It doesn't say all other appointments. The Rambam made that part up. Sarich lomar dehu sfarat atzmo k'moshe darshinan. And we must say that this is the Rambam's own position. He doesn't get it from anywhere else. Hashkacha al kashrut mistaber shehu minui. And it seems that providing supervision for kashrus would be an appointment, would be such an appointment. Rayala zamikidushin. She'ita b'marava afilu reish kurei lo mukme minayu. Right, as it says, we see that when it comes to supervisory capacity, so here it's talking about a supervisor of weights. That right there it said that's an appointment of authority, and so therefore we cannot appoint non-Jews, and it seems called the more so we couldn't appoint a woman in any such official capacity. Right? What difference would there be between affirming the kashrus of weights and measures or affirming the kashrus of food? So he says when it comes to this notion of svara, of authority, it's not regarding the distinction. The issue is not whether it's an important job or a respectable job. Ella, the imnis karla sot ratzon hamaskiro hu poel af shehi malacha chashuva. Right? If someone is hired by the Baal Habayit, by the homeowner, by the business owner, someone's hired by the business owner to do what the business owner wants them to do, that person is a worker.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah.
Imis karla, so neged ritzon Baal Habayit, hashkacha mishkalot midot shebal habayit efshar rotzeh sheyatzkir lo gam mishkal umideh chaserim hu mimuneh leposlam nikam Baal Habayit hu srara. But if the person is hired to go against the will or to enforce rules over the owner, that would be considered authority. So if the person is hired to make sure that the business owner has proper weights and measures, has proper food, and they have the power to somehow punish or enforce them, that would be srara. That would be authority. So if Moshe says that it appears that mashgiach for kashrus would be in a position of such authority.
And I'm sure she'll catch up with you tomorrow. So I had a good sleep, and yeah, all the best. Yeah. I will, yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm losing my train in the Hebrew. Okay, so he says, right, so it seems he says that this might be a position of svara, serving as mashgiach. It seems that not everyone agrees with the Rambam. Okay, not everyone agrees with the Rambam because the Rambam is a das yachid. So therefore, in this very specific case of a widow in need, we can rely on everyone but the Rambam, he says. We can allow her to take over her husband's position in order to provide for her family because there's a great financial need for it. And we can disregard the Rambam because it's not so clear that that's, that anyone else holds like the Rambam. The Rambam is a das yachid. But then he gives another suggestion. Says we can allow her to serve in this capacity and even fulfill the Rambam's requirement. How is that? Is that this rabbi who wrote to Rav Moshe Feinstein should start a kashrus commission, should start some sort of board of kashrus, and the owner of this business, of the restaurant, of the factory, will hire the rabbi. So the rabbi is the ultimate authority, and then the rabbi can go ahead and hire the woman as his representative. So she's not really making any policy determinations, or the final word, if she finds a violation, won't come from her, but will come from the hiring rabbi, so that would even allay the concerns of the Rambam. Okay, so that's his first position. That's his first step in dealing with this. He defines for us what srara is, what this authority is. Srara is when the person is empowered to punish or fine or go against the will of the business owner.
But that's the irony of that, is that with hashkacha these days, you're not supposed to be hired by the owner whose business you're performing the.
Yes and no. Yes, and you're technically mashgichim are hired by the kashrus agency.
Right.
Answer to the kashrus agency. Although in the times that I've served as mashgiach, my paycheck came from the restaurant.
Okay,
generally the case. I mean, maybe with, in a factory setting, that's not the case, and the OU is actually paying their mashgichim on the OU payroll. But right, that's generally how kashrus works in our day and age. That there is some authoritative body, but who's to say? Who's to say a woman couldn't set up a hashgacha? There was a big to do a while ago. I remember seeing articles when the Star K decided to hire women mashgichot, and it was big news. But they said, they're employed by us, and they're trustworthy, and they know what they're doing, so there's not really an issue. So that's step number one. The second shuva, number 12, this Rabbi Popko writes back to Rav Moshe, and he asks him, if you're willing to dismiss the Rambam so quickly, it might lead, it may be way worse than what mixed dancing leads to. It might lead, God forbid, to a woman being elected president or prime minister of the state of Israel.
A prime minister.
Well, it says Nasi, or president. Actually, Moshe is famous for this, right? He writes it out in the Hebrew letters. Yimnu Nashim le president of Medinat Israel. They'll appoint women as president, right? I don't know. I didn't put the date, so I don't know if this was pre or post Golda Meir. But Rabbi Popko was right. It did lead to women. So if Moshe says it's nourishkeit, they don't care, right? No one in Israel is, the Israeli government is not functioning based on my psak. They don't care what I have to say. And, the fact that I'm saying in this one situation, we don't need to rely on the Rambam, it has no bearing on what's going to happen in Israel. Okay, so that's step number 2. Is he sort of gives us a realistic perspective on what his sphere of influence is, which is interesting. Right? He says those who have strayed from the path of Torah, even if they were clearly forbidden by Torah, would not care and were not responsible for them. Very interesting. One more tshuva of Moshe Feinstein, right? So this is making another leap, which is the question which arose, and this was famous. I forget exactly when it was, in Syracuse, when the Young Israel in Syracuse wanted to appoint a woman president, and they were kicked out of the Young Israel organization as a result. So this got quoted a lot. So here Rav Moshe is not talking about a woman serving as president. He's talking about a case where a shul wants to appoint as a president someone who's rumored to violate Shabbos, to be a Machal Shabbos. Can an Orthodox shul appoint someone who is rumored to be a Machal Shabbos? So Rav Moshe writes, if it's true that he doesn't keep Shabbos, sorry, I did not scroll down in your sheet. It's explicit in the Rambam that whoever does not fear heaven, even if he is exceptionally wise, we do not permit him for any appointment among the Jewish people, and all the more so if he is a simpleton. To be president of a synagogue is certainly an appointment. It's certainly a minui. We can ask Jeff Coleman what authority a shul president really has. He'll tell you none whatsoever. And I'm sure Howard Letterman and Don Arking and Jen Bader and all our previous presidents will tell you the same thing. But Moshe Feinstein seems to think that serving as president of a synagogue is such an appointment. Again, whether if he's dealing with a synagogue which has board elections, I don't know if that would change things for him. If the congregation elects, just like they were able to all agree that Devorah would be their source of authority, they would rely on her. So if there's elections, I'm not sure if that would change the game for Moshe Feinstein. But presumably the authority the shul president has is to hire and fire the rabbi. So if then that seems to be problematic for him. Any questions here? We're going through this a little bit quickly.
is the attitude towards employing women in positions of authority being equated to appointing non-Jews to positions of authority, and thereby making a kind of equation that the only authentic Jews are men? Women who were born in Jewish families and live in a certain way and so on are not really Jews. By being
I don't
female,
think,
they're excluded.
I don't think anyone is saying they're not really Jews. I don't think anyone is saying
But
that.
they're acting like it.
They're saying that their roles and are different, right? So we haven't, whether it stems from this technical requirement that to serve in a position of authority, one has to be able to serve as a witness. That's one possibility. There's a very similar discussion. I hope I'm not confusing people by this. When the conservative movement was debating whether they would ordain women. We know that that ship has sailed. The conservative movement certainly ordains women as rabbis. But one of the big questions they asked, and again, this was old school conservative Jewry, was if women can't serve as a chazan, because there were conservative shuls, there still are a handful, that did not allow women to serve as the prayer leader. So if a woman can't be the chazan, if she can't lead the davening, how could she be the rabbi? Right? And others said, well, even if you're going to say that a woman can't lead the davening, that's not necessarily what a rabbi does. But I think we're all thankful that your rabbi doesn't lead the davening too often. So some might say it's just this sort of technical issue about capacity to serve as a witness, and that's sort of a baseline in order to hold other positions that have to do with legal dealings. Some might say it has to do with the whole notion of mitzvah seisha man grama, not that there's any positive commandment, time-bound commandment about serving in these positions, but the general dispensation, whatever rationale is given, whether it's that the assumption is women are not as legalistically minded and are more spiritual and therefore don't need the same rigor of discipline of mitzvot, or whether it's that the woman's focus should be on the home, that might be part of the consideration. It could be because women are not obligated to study Torah, so therefore it might be seen as sort of a disrespect to the men that are obligated. Again, I don't buy these. I don't accept these. I'm just saying what some of the arguments are about it. So there's a whole host of, but no, I don't think anyone would take it to that extreme to say they're not authentically Jewish. And again, the discussion with the Rambam, I don't think anyone would make the case that a non-Jew could serve as a king of Israel, or that a non-Jew, it would be interesting, right, in the current Israeli politics. So there's been a much greater acceptance of the Arab parties. I don't think there's any chance in any time at all that there will be an Arab elected as prime minister, but it's theoretically possible. Right? So what would that, that would be a really interesting halachic discussion. But, as a shul president, I don't think anyone has a havamin, anyone has any thought that a non-Jew could serve as a shul president. But, the Rambam's discussion was the context of a convert. And that did lead to a lot of offensive comments made about the status of converts within the Jewish community. And the final tshuva we're going to see from Moshe Feinstein is actually dealing, again, not with the status of woman, but the status of a convert. Question is, can you appoint a convert to the position of Rosh Yeshiva or Mashgiach? So remember, Moshe Feinstein just told us that serving as a Mashgiach for Kashrus is the type of position which has authority and is an appointment that the Rambam was describing. He told us that a shul president has that position. And now he's being asked, can a convert? And he's been concerned for the Rambam all along. The Rambam, before he told us a woman can't serve in any of these capacities, told us that a convert can't. But when it comes to the question of a convert serving as a Rosh Yeshiva, he tells us two things. Number one, we have a mitzvah via haftet hager. We have to show love to the convert, which obligates us to bring them closer and to be lenient in all of these matters. Therefore, after much deliberation, it seems that we should not consider these positions in our day to be instances of srara. Okay, so a shul president is a position of srara, of defined authority, but a Rosh Yeshiva is not. Because the essential function of a yeshiva is to teach students what they want to learn. The fact that the administration and Rosh Yeshiva have the power to remove students or not accept them, this is only to the similar to the authority the homeowner has over his workers. It is not an appointment of authority. These appointments are merely like filling a job in business. This should not be compared to that which I wrote about appointing a woman as a mashgiach for kashrus, which is an appointment of authority, because there is an appointment to go against the desire of the owner based on the Torah, which commanded us to eat kosher. Okay, so he goes through somersaults to say that serving as a Rosh Yeshiva is not the same type of position as these other positions. And one has to wonder, how much of this is, maybe you're fully convinced by that. And maybe the yeshiva doesn't have the same authority as other institutions.
What would he say? What would he say about a non-Jew being a Rosh Yeshiva?
What would he say? I mean, I can't imagine that would ever come up. I
No?
can't.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Based on this, it seems it would be possibly okay if people accept him as it. I don't know. But the point is that when we're dealing with these questions of srara, that there seems to be more extra legal concerns that go into these determinations, at least on the surface. I'm not sure. So anyway, so that's where the conversation for tonight is going to stop. Again, I provided on the source sheet, we're already at 9 o'clock. I provided on the source sheet both a link to Yeshivat Maharat, which has several articles on the issues involved in women being appointed to clergy, on granting smicha to women. You have one sample article tshuva here. Again, I chose it just because it was the shortest of the ones that they have. And it was translated. Some of us know Rabbi Ross Singer. Dad, he was our tour guide in Israel, and everyone else, he lived in Baltimore and had a connection with Mitzvot. He enjoyed davening with us and has come back to visit on occasion. So you can take a look at this, but again, so the way we got here was we're in Parshat Shoftim this week, which is the parsha of leadership, including the description of the king. We have the Midrash in Sifrei, which tells us, Som tasim alacha melech v'lo malka, you shall appoint for yourself a king and not a queen. We ultimately get to the Rambam, who tells us, and he's the only one who holds this way, that melech v'lo malka, king and not a queen, that should apply to all positions of authority within the community, such that there's serious questions of women serving as a mashgiach or kashrus. It was applied in the question of women serving as presidents of synagogue, and it is very much in play in the discussion of women serving as rabbi. There are other issues as well. We touched on some of them. Certainly, the whole issue of tznius is front and near, is prominent here, as well as, for better or worse, concerns of differentiating the Orthodox world from the non-Orthodox world. It's rumored that there were those Orthodox rabbis who said that once Rabbi Joel Roth, who was the head of the halacha committee of the conservative movement when they decided to ordain women, once he wrote his tshuva and the way which he justified it, so once he wrote it, then it became, he closed the door for liberal Orthodox rabbis to issue such a ruling because the political fallout would have been too great. So we're constantly dealing with and revisiting women's questions of women's involvement in halacha, women's involvement in the community. I don't think it's any secret where I stand on any of this stuff. I'm very happy to be part of a shul that embraces women's leadership, women's full participation. But it is still very much an issue that is discussed. It's an issue that we should have familiarity with, and it's one that I'm sure we'll continue to visit as well. Are there any final thoughts or questions on any of this?
I can't help, excuse me, but be struck that is seeing the basic issue, that of coercive authority.
Yeah,
And we don't really have that going on anyway. So
right. So if we're gonna extending it, right, I could tell you the rabbi certainly has no authority. The shul president doesn't have authority either.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking quickly of the history of the ancient Near East, in which the Sumerians' king was one who brought forth the law from the deity and also acted as the mediator there. And so when we had our King David and King Shlomo, they were expected to be a shofet, but then we come down into the Second Temple period and it's not so. So it's really not so much an issue of shoter as it is shotrim. Who is going to enforce? Who has the power to enforce the shotrim to do what they're to do? And Devorah sent her husband into the war, and tells him, you're not going to get the credit for this, but I'm telling you that you need to do this, and he goes ahead and does it. So that's an example. She had her shoter, in other words, she did have it, and she had the authority to use it. But we don't even have shotrim, so it's kind of a moot point, really, in that regard.
Yeah. All right. So as always, I hope I gave you what to think about.
Oh, yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Looking forward to seeing everyone over Shabbos, and we will. This week I'm going to straighten out the Zoom issue. That's my project.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Hey, Lyra,
Right.
Night.